Over a period of just under 13 months, you killed 7 fragile babies and attempted to kill 6 others. Some of your victims were only a day or a few days old. All were extremely vulnerable. They were in a hospital where others were striving to provide them with dedicated medical and nursing care. By their nature and number, such murders and attempted murders by a neonatal nurse entrusted to care for them are offences of very exceptional seriousness. The damaging impact of your actions on others working at that hospital, including those who numbered you as a friend, betraying their trust and creating upset and suspicion, as well as eroding confidence in clinicians and nurses generally, aggravates their seriousness. This was a cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of child murder involving the smallest and most vulnerable of children, knowing that your actions were causing significant physical suffering and would cause untold mental suffering. You created situations so that collapses or causes of collapses would not be obvious or associated with you. You removed and retained confidential records of events relating to your crimes and checked up on bereaved parents. There was a deep malevolence bordering on sadism in your actions. During the course of this trial, you have coldly denied any responsibility for your wrongdoing and sought to attribute some fault to others. You have no remorse. There are no mitigating factors. In their totality, the offences of murder and attempted murder were of exceptionally high seriousness, and just punishment, according to law, requires a whole life order.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, that was Judge James Goss. During sentencing, what you don't see in the footage is the parents of the murdered babies, 5 newborn boys and 2 girls, sobbing in the courtroom. Lucy is only the 3rd woman in Britain to receive a life order. The others, Myra Hindley and Rosemary West, were also serial killers. And yet one has a lingering sense from the main protagonists in this case, from the investigators and prosecutors pursuing justice in this sordid affair, that who Lucy really is and why she did what she did still escapes them. So you have Britain's most prolific serial killer getting one of the worst sentences ever. You've tried her in court, you've convicted her, but you're still unable to say why. And apparently we may never know. Detective Inspector Evans said, "We may never know why." Janet Moore, Cheshire's Police Family Liaison Officer, speaking on behalf of the baby's family, said something similar. She said, "We are heartbroken, devastated, angry, and feel numb. We may never truly know why this happened." And then, according to Reuters, quote, detectives said they had found nothing unusual about Letby's life and could not determine any motive. "Unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever know unless she just chooses to tell us," said Detective Superintendent Paul Hughes, who led the investigation.
Are you out of your fucking mind?
I hope that doesn't sound unkind. I apologize if it sounds mean, but people are very naive if they think crimes can be solved by criminals telling us, by them writing a manifesto, by putting them on trial and them explaining, volunteering exactly what they did. Right? Probably many of them don't understand it themselves and couldn't express it very succinctly even if they tried. Of course, we will never know unless we try. And that's where true crime rocket science comes in. And sometimes maybe we do need a little rocket science in this genre. When you're dealing with the worst of the worst, or one of the worst of the worst, isn't it worth knowing what someone's motivations are? Shouldn't we try to know? Shouldn't we put in some effort to try to understand? Well, that's what this episode's all about. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Did you notice a tiny little red flag fluttering when we looked at how a young registrar, which is a doctor in the middle of his training, a married doctor in this case, the fact that he drove Lucy home on the night one of the babies died? That little flag is significant in the scheme of things. The question is, how? Now, you might see a premise in the death of a baby and that bringing Lucy to close quarters with a presumably dashing young registrar. But the deeper dynamic is also that he allows her to depend on him. For a lot of people, they wouldn't want or need to be driven home. Why can't she drive herself? But it's this gesture of care that's somehow warmly familiar to her, like a parent taking charge of her situation. And so I think what this does is it tweaks some sense of a romantic fairy tale in her programming. And the source code for this programming is where? Upbringing. Lucy's mother was inconsolable in court when her only child officially became a convicted killer. At the moment Lucy was convicted, her mother collapsed in tears, gasping, "This cannot be right," and saying, "I did it, take me instead." Again, I don't think I've ever seen that level of response in a parent in a murder trial context, and I've attended a few and watched many others. What we're seeing here, what we're witnessing here, is an extreme amount of doting. It's overprotective, it's overparenting. Does that make sense? According to the Daily Mail, quote, Lucy appeared to speak or text her parents every day and described them as suffocating at times. She told one doctor friend who was considering moving to New Zealand that she could never do that as it would completely devastate her parents. She also wrote, "They find it hard enough being away from me now, and it's only 100 miles. In a message to another friend, she wrote, "My parents worry massively about everything and anything. They hate that I live alone." So, where many of these detectives see nothing unusual, well, the amount of dotage Lucy was experiencing from her parents clearly was very unusual. It was extreme. That's one side of the psychological coin. The other side is being treated like a princess by her parents, being treated like this very special person by her family. Well, if you have that on the one hand, and on the other, the world, certainly the world that she wants, the people that she likes, well, they don't see her, they don't treat her as well, they don't dote on her. Why? Because she's beige and invisible. And so as she transitions in her 20s into the real world, uncomfortable feelings of inadequacy and insecurity sort of steal up upon her. Sorry to say, the seat of these feelings come from her own parents. They have not fostered independence in their daughter, but the opposite, likely due to their own small-mindedness, transferring their own anxiety and emotional dependence onto her. Mother birds and nests. Much of this case is about mothers and babies. It's an analog to a young bird that's supposed to leave the nest and start her own family, but instead she tends to all the nests of all the other birds, tending to the eggs and chicks, while her own parents flutter and shriek suffocatingly at her, well, from a safe distance. And then, when she comes across a nest she particularly likes, she wants to be mollycoddled all over again, but on her own terms. And because that's what she knows, that's what she expects. She feels she deserves it. She just doesn't know how to make it happen. because she's a little awkward, because she's not used to being in the real world and on her own feet. She's not been tested by the real world on its own terms. So the only way to get the real world to respond to her whims, she realizes, is to cynically trick it. Munchausen by proxy. Those who know me, know my channel, or have read my books, know how allergic I am to labels. For once, this one is actually useful. According to one definition, doctors aren't sure what causes Munchausen syndrome by proxy, but it may be linked to problems during their childhood. Now, one reason I hate labels isn't for the thinking and answers they provide, but the thinking and answers and the process in getting there, well, that they prevent us from thinking about. The key here is that this is all about someone who wants, someone who needs, someone who demands, someone who expects, someone who thinks she deserves a lot of attention. I mean, take all of that away, it's about wanting attention. And why do you want so much attention? Why is there the struggle for attention? Where does that come from? Well, in this case, it comes from trying to escape the suffocating care and attention she gets from her parents, but then being desperately in need of it somewhere else, but not knowing how to get it, except through a kind of coercion, a sadistic coercion where she gets what she wants at the expense, literally, of another's life. But it's a kind of a desperate, despairing need for something that she really, really badly wants. And she's been taught that if she wants something, she can have it. The Munchausen thing, while I feel is overused in true crime, like narcissism, it actually resonates in what we know about Lucy. Because we know that, for example, Lucy Letby fainted at work after she and fellow medics could not revive a baby boy that emerged during her murder trial. Also, during her arrest, Lucy, who just returned from holiday with her parents, she claimed that she just had her knee operated on. That same day, her father had stayed overnight and then he'd made her bed after her arrest. Number 3, after hearing the allegations against her, Lucy played the victim, accusing her colleagues of bullying, victimizing, and conspiring against her. Probably the same strategy she used with her parents. She was used to getting her way, and when she didn't get away with her parents, if she played the victim, if she, if she sought sympathy, if she was sort of self-pitying and felt sorry for herself, well, then her parents felt sorry for her, and then wish fulfillment was provided. And so this is something else that is learned behavior. The other thing, and I think when you're so busy labeling someone a psychopath, you forget that they actually do have emotions. And in this case, emotion is one key to figuring out Lucy's motive. When Lucy's crimes were documented one by one in court, a journalist admitted that she too was reduced to tears. She wrote, "I remember being struck by just how normal Letby looked. It seemed improbable that this woman could be capable of such heinous crimes. She was just so calm. It was unnerving." And so this attitude, this impression that people, including journalists who are supposed to pay extra attention, they're supposed to report on what they see, this is because we've become a society of surfaces. We're fairly good at understanding how we feel about things, but we're terrible at intuiting the symbolic frameworks of others. And if that word is a surprise to you, well, that's further proof of it, that you're not very good at dealing with someone else's symbolic frameworks. You don't even know that that's a thing. Human beings are symbolic animals. Words, language, the stuff of our entire thought process are things, abstractions that represent something else. That might be hard to understand. You might think, wow, this is getting really cerebral. What are you talking about? But, if you are within your own symbolic woods, it might seem completely normal to you. But as soon as you go into someone else's, such as if you go to another country where they speak a different language and they use different symbols to represent certain meaningful constructs, but even just ordinary reality, then you see all too clearly just how pervasive the symbolism is. We think in concepts, we think in symbols, we think about our lives in terms of fairy tales and nightmares, monsters and heroes. All of this is very familiar to us. It's just that we can't even begin to comprehend those symbolic constructs in others. Ernest Becker is a cultural anthropologist. He's done tremendous work, very, very insightful, very, very interesting in that regard, and he even won a Pulitzer Prize for it. In any event, the key to understanding Lucy is also through her emotions. While so many have fixated on her lack of remorse, on her lack of feeling, and while it's easy to imagine that that is all she is, a cool, calculated killer, well, beneath that exterior is someone that's actually quite familiar to us. And so you see headlines like these. In court, Lucy showed emotion when the doctor she had an affair with testified. Or Lucy Letby first showed emotion in court when Dr. Crush gave evidence. Or Lucy Letby murdered 2 premature triplets to get the attention of a doctor she had a crush on. Simply hearing the doctor's voice in court was enough to reduce Lucy to tears. And so let's have a look at this article. For months, Letby, 33, was impassive as she sat in the dock and listened to the prosecution outline its case. And that was at the Manchester Crown Court. And then detailed the horrific crime she committed. There was no flicker of emotion betrayed until the afternoon of February 16, when the medic, the doctor who cannot be identified for legal reasons, confirmed his name after he swore an oath. Letby and people in the public gallery could not see the doctor because he had asked to give his evidence from behind a screen. His voice prompted her to break down in tears, and then she abruptly left her seat and walked towards the exit door of the dock. So let me ask you a question. Do you think she loved him? Do you think she was in love? Do you think what those responses betray is someone who doesn't have any feeling and is a cold, heartless person, or that something was going on in her heart? According to the article, when the time came for her to enter the witness box, she said she loved him as a trusted friend. In other words, she's acknowledging some truth in the in terms of the fabric of what was going on. But she said that she was not in love with him. Do you think that that's true? I mean, if simply hearing his voice made her feel overcome with emotion, do you think this was an ordinary person going through an ordinary infatuation? Because to me, it seems like no ordinary infatuation. It seems like an extreme amount of feeling, whatever you want to call it. And the media have, rightly in my view, described her feelings for her anonymous paramour as obsessive and fixated. And I don't think you could commit the crimes that she committed without being in love and having one's heart and mind addled by something that can feel like an addiction, where you have an obsession clouding your mind, a fixation twisting you into knots, right? One nursing colleague apparently teased her about flirting with the registrar, the court has heard. So there were people around her that noticed that something was going on. And then obviously she would deny it. She denied the same in text messages. According to the article, following her return from a holiday to Ibiza with friends, she messaged the doctor in June 2016 about the arrival of triplets on the unit, 2 of whom she went on to murder. She asked the registrar, "What gestation are the trips? I don't mind being busy anyway. Are you on NNU?" That's shorthand for the neonatal unit, tomorrow. The doctor replied, "I like it when you're in the intensive care unit. Everything feels safe and organized." On the next day at work, before she went on to murder one of the triplets, she messaged him, "I've forgotten my sandwich. Can I go home?" Still in holiday mode. The doctor quipped, "Probably not, but would you like me to write you a note?" And that brings us to the last thing that I want to deal with in terms of this, which is intertextualities. We see a lot of anger in this case directed at the NHS, at the head nurse, at the hospital chief, and at Lucy herself. But I wonder whether her friend never joined the dots himself, or if he didn't, well, perhaps he should have. Because clearly, as the body count of dead babies was increasing, and Lucy's name came up again and again, one also has to wonder which doctor was typically on duty at the same time as these incidents as well. Now, I'm not implying that the doctor did anything, just that if two other doctors had figured out a pattern, why hadn't the one at the epicenter of the whole thing done the same thing? Why couldn't he have done the same thing? This case reminds me somewhat of Suzanne Morphew from near Salida in Colorado. She was having an affair with a married father of 6 named Jeff Libler. And then when Suzanne disappears, you don't really hear much from him. You don't really see him. In any event, according to the article, the doctor's name appeared repeatedly on a number of scrawled notes found at Letby's home address following her arrest. One referred to him as my best friend, and the notes also included several references to love was all we needed. Letby told the jury it was a lyric to a Craig David song, which was obviously on my mind at that time, but it was just a random thought. You can see how she's trying to distort the reality of what was going on through these notes. She also said that the pair would meet outside work, kind of extramurally. Letby said, sometimes he came to my house. Sometimes we would go out for meals or coffee or walks. In social media messages and photographs from July 2016 onwards, these were taken from Letby's phone. Nick Johnson, the prosecutor, pointed to an away day in London that she spent in June 2017 with the same registrar. Mr. Johnson, the prosecutor, asked her while she was on the stand, did you stay overnight with him? She answered no. She said, justifying her answer, saying, he's a married man. We were not in a relationship at all. It was a friendship. She said this friendship fizzled out at the beginning of 2018 before her arrest in the summer of that year. Now, this also reminds me of the Watts case, except here the children and babies who die aren't her own. They're merely levers she pushes to draw a colleague into her orbit. In this sense, it's the opposite of the Chris Watts case. He kills his family to remove the obstacles to his affair so that he can improve his access to his co-worker, only for the act itself to repel and repulse Nicole Kessinger. So in terms of her motive, I'm really not sure it's rocket science. It shouldn't be. Even the media have summarized the case quite well, perhaps without realizing they've also summarized the motive. I found this in one of the articles I read, quote, Letby was suspected of having a secret affair with a married doctor who became her best friend while she was murdering babies at work. And so the psychological connection there, when you understand that, well, then you understand the motive. And so that didn't happen accidentally. The relationship and the babies dying, that wasn't accidental or coincidental. It was by design. And also, it was because of her upbringing, she needed a particular kind of attention. And in the neonatal unit, she found an easy way of getting that attention from one colleague in particular. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.